Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
On this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship, the theme is transforming the apparel industry. And I'm really excited to have the co-founders of DOUBL, a new startup, on this week's episode. And those co-founders are Bryn Davis-Williams and Jessica Bosman. And their startup is working to transform a specific aspect of the apparel industry, which they're going to speak a little bit about now. So, Bryn and Jessica, can you describe what is your company? What is the mission of DOUBL?
For sure. And thanks for having us, Scott. So, DOUBL is an advanced manufacturing company that looks to solve people's retail problems of the past with the most advanced technology of today. Our first product is a first of its kind made to measure bra that you can order completely from your smartphone that is guaranteed to fit you perfectly.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview. And it's great to have you both on the show as well. How did you come up with the idea? What was the genesis behind creating this company?
Yeah, so Jess and I met in business school, not the most uncommon meet cute. And one of our projects was called the New Venture Project, and it was coming up with an idea for a venture. We were looking at a couple different industries and noticed, to your point in the introduction, how broken the retail industry was. It really hadn't changed in over 100 years. So bras in particular, the original sizing system for them was invented in the 1930s, and it's the exact same letters and numbers that we use today. Literally hasn't changed. And I would argue that the role of women has transformed quite a bit since the 1930s. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Victoria's Secret also, for example, which is still the largest intimate apparel company today, was actually started by men for men. I think that's becoming a more well-known fact, but it just goes to show how a lot of women's needs haven't been addressed in the last 100 years. And that's kind of where we came up with the original passion point and spark for DOUBL.
And what's also interesting is at that time, Uber was blowing up. So there was this wave of new companies coming in and fully disrupting industries in such a unique way. So we also wanted to innovate a stagnant industry and transform it from the inside out. And we just felt like the bra was something that we resonated with.
Who are other competitors kind of operating in this space? Like, is there anyone else in the world that is also looking to kind of tackle this specific problem?
We've seen a lot of companies who are looking to tackle fit, which is the main problem that we solve, but they are looking to fit people into the right sizes as opposed to manufacture clothing just for them.
It's a fascinating topic. Obviously, I am a man, so I do not have a huge amount of experience in terms of bras. But and a gay man, so I have even less experience. But in terms of one of the things that I think about is my recent experience in Asia, where I went to Vietnam, and there's a place called Hoi An where you can go and it's just like everything is custom. Like it's such a huge part of their apparel industry there. What are the challenges in making more like custom kind of like bras? Like in essence, like why hasn't this already been done?
Yeah, that's a great question. The technology truly hasn't existed until the past 6 months, and this is something that we've been working on for many years now when it comes to R&D. And there's been different ways that we've looked at approaching the problem. However, in order to make it scalable and user friendly from a consumer standpoint, and for people who are a little bit less competent with technology, it has really been this past year where it's truly scalable and possible to do this in a efficient manner. So I think that's why it hasn't been done. We will truly be like the first to market with a made to measure bra in a scalable way.
One thing I would love to dive deeper in is to like the actual like mechanics of like how do you manufacture these custom bras? Because I can imagine, okay, if you have just like a big bra factory and you're making the same product, okay, you have standard processes, standard procedures. You're just creating thousands of bras like kind of every day. But when each thing is custom, there has a degree of specification in terms of each product, and I can imagine a little less potential in terms of efficiency. So, how do you like what can you describe at a high level? I'm sure it's quite complicated in terms of how it's actually done, but at a high level, how do you manufacture custom apparel products like bras in a cost effective way?
Yeah, of course. So purchasing the item is like you would with any apparel product. So you go to our Shopify site, select the color and style that you want, and check out. And then you're going to have a next step of following a link that brings you to our 3D measurement technology scanning app. But it's nice and simple. It's just from your phone. It takes under 5 minutes and it has almost 100% accuracy rate. So then after you're done that easy scan, you just need a white wall, some tight fitted black clothing. Then you're done from a customer standpoint. And then on our end, we then utilize those measurements in the form of an avatar. We upload it to a very advanced pattern making software where we utilize a subset of those measurements to then fit it perfectly to your body. And then we have that come back out two dimensionally and we release it to our factory in batches.
In terms of the actual manufacturing, like when you're doing all of these custom like orders, so because I get the part on you're scanning like and how newer technology allows you to collect this kind of data in a way that is probably more accurate than like 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. But in terms of the actual manufacturing, how do you keep the costs down in terms of your product while making all of these like incredibly like custom products?
Yeah, we work with a really specialized intimate apparel factory. So they've been working with some of the largest brands in the industry for many, many years. So they're extremely capable. They have really advanced technology, equipment, workers, lots of skilled labor. So we pay a little bit of a premium, of course, because it is unique items, it is batch work. However, we charge a little bit of a premium for our product in order to cover those costs. And therefore, it is still scalable and it's also still an accessible price point, in our opinion, for the level of support and customization that you are receiving.
And I've talked to other folks sometimes broadly in this sector, and I know most of like the production for often these factories are in Asia, like in particular China. Is your like manufacturing partner in China or in Asia?
So ours is in Sri Lanka. We have a really wonderful pattern maker, and she is originally from Sri Lanka, and her husband have previously worked with this factory, so they had a personal relationship. So they've been incredible in helping us secure a really skilled factory and bringing the product to life.
How do you navigate the like dealing with like an outsourced kind of manufacturer, is particularly in the context of like massive distance, huge different kind of time change? I've spoken with folks more on the manufacturing side, and even companies like Apple can sometimes deal with the challenges in their context dealing with like Foxconn. But yeah, how do you like what advice do you have for entrepreneurs on working with an outsourced manufacturer, particularly when that manufacturer is in a completely different area of the world?
Yeah, I think I would recommend ensuring that you have a really strong level of communication. So, for example, in our situation, our pattern maker speaks the same language as them. I've also met them numerous times, and we have like developmental meetings, and we ensure that we have timelines in place. We do lots of sampling. So we've gone through a few different factories, and I would say our biggest takeaway is that ensuring the communication is strong. You're both aligned on the vision because, especially as a startup, this is something we're doing for the first time. It's truly never existed before. So you want to make sure you have a partner who's on board at bringing that vision to life because it likely will, you might run into some more challenges than you would with a traditional like apparel manufacturer. So those would be, I think, the two things that we've really taken away. But it's been an incredibly smooth relationship, and we haven't had any issues with working with an offshore partner.
How do you navigate like protecting your intellectual kind of property when you're working with like an outsourced partner in this way? I've been always intrigued in this question just in general, like even in the context of like iPhone. But yeah, like what are and I guess the other important point to mention is that I'm sure that these factories also deal with a lot of other like companies that are also producing product. And it's like there's the term like Chinese wall, but in essence, like there has to be internal divisions within the company to kind of protect different firms' intellectual property. How do you navigate that with your third party manufacturer to ensure that, yeah, your IP stays your IP?
Yeah, Bryn, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I think you're probably familiar, Scott, with the term like building a moat. So there's a couple different ways that we're approaching building our own moat. So one of them is similar to Apple doing some kind of design patent, right? So that you have something there around the design that you're building. Another option, so that could be for the garment itself, right? But then we can also do to protect your tech pack and pattern, but we can also do patents around the tech stack that we're using. Also, part of that is trade secrets. So you'll notice we haven't walked you through exactly what our tech stack is because we're keeping that to ourselves. But then, more broader than that, we had the intention of fully disrupting a business model, right, by using new technology. And it does take time to do that. So we are imagining that it'll take some time for somebody to be able to change their entire manufacturing process to be able to do on demand. Because to your point earlier, it is a very different supply chain. So instead of having 1,000 pieces of material that are compressed under a vacuum seal and cut it at the same time and doing an assembly line like that, we have to do each piece by piece, similar to how custom suits are manufactured, right? So that's part of the moat. And then the other part of the moat is building a really strong brand and really building a strong community. And that's something that we've been building since day one. And that's where my background is, and Jess and I have a lot of passion and conversations around how to build that brand. And then the first mover's advantage, right? And just getting there as quickly as you can, which is why we're moving as fast as possible.
In terms of like the materials for the bras, is that something that you purchase through the manufacturer, or is that something that you do kind of completely separate from them?
Originally, we did all of our own sourcing ourselves, which in hindsight was a very big undertaking that we didn't realize was typically something that would be included in the factory offerings. So now we are moving to a model where the factory would be doing that sourcing for us, as it's extremely time consuming to be ensuring that your inventory levels are always where they want to be, where you want them to be. And it also allows us to test more fabrics at a quicker rate and ensure that we're providing the right level of support and quality that we're hoping to produce with the product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's fascinating to learn more about the kind of intricacies of these arrangements. One other question that comes to mind is in terms of your relationship like with the factory. Do you like, is it typical where you enter into like an exclusive, like do you have to sign like a exclusive relationship with them? Do you pay? I have a couple questions, but I'll leave it at that. Is do you have an exclusive, is it typical to have an exclusive relationship with the manufacturer?
No, it's not typical at all because they're taking on lots of different partners and typically they specialize, right? So our factory is specialized in intimate apparel. So they are working with other bra companies, which of course has its pros and cons because there is potentially overlap then in fabrics and where the sourcing is coming from. But at the same time, you're benefiting from a lot of knowledge and learning that factory has gained from working with previous partners or current partners.
And then similarly, they don't ask exclusivity of us, right? Because then the power dynamic would be out of whack. So we can work with other partners. We can do different items through different partners if we wanted to. Typically, sampling is done a bit closer to home. So as we design a new SKU, we'll likely do some of that work, a bit closer to home so that we can really get into it. But yeah, balance is important in any relationship.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to have that kind of flexibility. I'm also thinking of Nike and the book Shoe Dog, which have you folks read that?
I haven't. It's on my list.
It's an interesting one where a lot of it talks about the early days of just how they produced all the shoes. And initially, actually, I think that they had potentially was like an exclusive relationship with like an outsourced manufacturer. It caused a lot of challenges. But anyway, it's a great book. In terms of that's probably my limited knowledge of the apparel industry would come from that book. One other question is in terms of like the arrangement that you have with the outsourced manufacturer. Is it something where you pay as you go, or is it something where it's like you pay like a kind of like an annual fee and then it's a mixture pay as you go? Like, how do these kinds of arrangements typically work between like apparel producers and the outsourced manufacturer?
Yeah, that's where our company is really unique. So we never hold inventory. So we actually pay as we go. We pay per product, whereas typically you would be submitting large orders either twice to four times a year, and you would likely prepay for those, or you would pay depending on whatever your terms are with that factory. So we pay as we go.
For really large like apparel producers, like these massive companies, would they typically also use like a third party manufacturing partner, or would they do it more likely in house?
Yeah, most people I would say like my background is in retail and like buying and merchandising, and I think that almost every company that I've worked for has used an external third party factory. Typically, the only reason to vertically integrate and bring it in house is if you have something that's like extremely proprietary, or there's something that you're doing that's so unique that no other factory is actually doing that. So you need to build it yourself. Or if you want to really have that quality control piece that close to home, if you're doing like a lot of experimental work. But typically, it's a lot more costly, obviously, to do things in house. So most people will use a third party.
How does the apparel item kind of make its way from like the factory to like the consumer, let's say in Canada? And to make the question like more specific, is that like, do you like once a bunch of bras have been made at the factory, do they all then come over in like a container and then they're distributed from Canada, or is each one sent like differently from the factory to like a person's like house?
Yeah, so we ship in batches. So, for example, say we get 100 orders, we'll give all those orders at once to the factory. They'll cut and sew everything together, and then they'll package them individually, but all together to us. And then right now, they would ship it to our DC, which is our house, and then we would individually wrap each customer's order and then ship it within Canada.
Fascinating. It's by the way, one of the great things I enjoy about this podcast is just learning about all these different kinds of businesses because there's so much intricacy. And I think for many people, it's like we just go to a store, pick up apparel, but there's so many different pieces that go into like the complex kind of supply chains. Uh, and I mean,
Mhm.
and then there's the supply chain of the factory, like in terms of actually getting the supplies to you. One question I have too is you mentioned like your factory is in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka as of taping, has had political instability over the last like kind of couple of months. Um, have you ever have there ever been challenges like in terms of like the political stability of Sri Lanka impacting ability to get product? And is that something like when you're thinking about outsourced manufacturing partners? How does geopolitical kind of instability or the threat of geopolitical instability factor into to your kind of working with manufacturers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our relationship with our factory is fairly new. However, when we embarked on that relationship with them, we did speak to them with regards to paying livable wages and the ethics at the factory, the safety components that were in place at the factory, and things like that. Um, I'm imagining there will be things that are out of our control in the future, as we saw with the pandemic, for example, that was a huge disruptive force in the supply chain world and in logistics in general. So I guess we will see. But from what we can control and ensuring that we are being as like ethical and sustainable as possible, those were the parameters that we put into place prior to entering into the relationship.
Absolutely, and I can imagine that's like an important risk to mitigate, and also in the sense of like if you're building this brand and it's around empowerment, it's around a future of apparel. Part of that is ensuring too that the workers who make the apparel are ethically treated and compensated. Shifting gears a little bit because we've kind of done a deep dive into like the manufacturing aspect, which I do think is like very interesting, and a lot of people don't necessarily know that much about it. Earlier in the interview you talked about like another there's two aspects to make a moat in terms of an apparel business. One is the actual like manufacturing and other aspects of it, and then the second is the brand. And uh, you've recently launched this company, you're building out this brand. I love your website. um, what are some of the things you're doing to build out the brand of Double so that you have this kind of competitive moat?
Yeah, so I think, going back to our earliest conversations, it was really making sure that there was a concrete definition for your brand, right? The number one trick to branding is consistency. You're trying to build memory structures in people's brains, and that's how you build a brand. So Jess and I have had so many conversations about what those memory structures look like, what those brand assets are that we want people to continue to come back to. And what we've had the hardest time doing actually is distilling all of our ideas into one single thought, right? And when you look at some of the best apparel companies or brands in general, like I know we've thrown out Apple, they always have like one very clear thought behind their brand, right? Like Apple was built for creatives, and everything they do goes back to that one idea. So their campaigns, right? All of their advertisements are shot on iPhones by creatives, for example, for the iPhone. And so it's really figuring out what that one idea is that you can build everything else around. And Jess and I are still figuring out what exactly that North Star is. But part of that conversation needs to go two ways, right? Like Jess and I can sit around and debate all we want, but we also have to listen to what consumers are saying. And so that becomes a bit of a push and pull testing and learning situation.
When you think of the double kind of like brand or like brand identity, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so DOUBL is all about breaking out of defined boxes. So we don't put people in sizes. And we also want to celebrate people not needing to live in any defined norms, defined stereotypes, defined roles. And I think that's been critical to the conversation around women's empowerment in the last many years. And I unfortunately think a lot of women's marketing took on this kind of selling confidence to women. And if you look at a lot of bra companies, especially, right, it's you're not confident right now, but you should be confident because you're awesome. And if you look at a lot of male marketing, it's you're awesome. This product will keep you awesome. You know what I mean? So there's a bit of this shift that needs to happen where women aren't sold the idea that they're not good enough. And so one of the things we're trying to do is figure out how we can flip that on its head a bit more, the same way we're trying to flip the retail industry on its head.
Famously, like around it was probably a decade ago and it went on for a couple of years. Like Dove had those famous ads, like that was around like kind of accepting like who you are. Like do you think that those ads, does that fall in the category of what you think is actually like negative, or do you think that, that's like an ad campaign that had a positive impact?
So I currently work at Unilever, the parent company of Dove. So
Oh.
it might be a conflict of interest question, but I think the important thing that Dove did was showing real women, right? Like, and I think that's where it starts is you need to see people who look like you in the world that you're in. And it was, the world's been an easy place relatively for Jess and I when it came to those kinds of things. We're both white women. But with body types, right, that can also be it. Like Jess is quite tall, taller than average. I have different, non-standard proportions. And so it's making sure that there's space held for you in the industries that you interact in. So I think, Dev did that by showcasing different body types, different ethnicities that we weren't seeing at the time. And I think what we're trying to do in a similar vein is get rid of sizes so that you don't need to try to find something that you can squeeze into, right? But everything can just be for you. And our goal eventually is when you sign into our website, all of the products, the models will be your body shape. So you're being reflected back to yourself.
Mhm.
It's very different than the ethos of the founder of Lululemon, who doubled down on his comments recently about how Lululemon is not intended for people of certain body sizes. So obviously, he does not necessarily represent Lululemon because he is not the CEO of Lululemon. He is just the founder and hasn't been involved in the business. But yeah, it seems like you're trying to, in some ways, be the antithetical kind of message for female consumers.
Mhm.
It's fascinating around this question of like how to build an apparel brand, particularly like for a startup, because that is so much of the success, but it's also something that is like so hard. Like there's so many different kind of like brands out there, and it's interesting, this question. Like Lululemon has been like a hugely successful, like financially, probably the most successful like new kind of apparel brand of the last kind of like 2 decades, kind of separate from Chip Wilson's like kind of like comments and more focusing on Lululemon, the company, which he hasn't been really involved with for 15 or 20 years. Like, what do you think like works about the Lululemon brand? Like, why, when you look at it, particularly as Canadian apparel entrepreneurs, um, why do you think how do you think that the Lululemon brand has been a moat that has helped propel the growth of the company?
So I think it comes back to one word, which is focus, right? And I think that goes back to what I was speaking about a bit earlier around really needing to crystallize everything into one thought. So the Lululemon of today is very different than the Lululemon, at its origin roots. But at its origin roots, it was a yoga company, and all they did was focused on yoga, right? Every single thing went back to the same yoga tenets, and everything was about yoga. And by focusing on that one pillar for so long, right? Women's yoga. I think it took them a while to bring in men's. They were able to grow to a place where they could then start to add things into that mix, like running and other sports, once they'd hit the critical mass. And that's why when you go to our website, we have one product, because it's so critical at the beginning that you focus, you grow. So we'll grow in bras, and then eventually we'll add in other verticals. All within the same target market, right? So Lululemon has their target market. Maybe Chip's target market has a certain body type, but I'm sure the current CEO of Lululemon has that one, target market of an active individual who's looking to constantly, improve and better themselves. For us, our target market is a working professional woman who's, at the top of her game and looking for clothing that will support her, convenient, comfortable clothing. And so as we build verticals, we'll build into pants for work, blazers, dress shirts, etc. But you need that absolute crystal focus at the beginning, I think.
I think what's also interesting about Lululemon is that they've basically pioneered athleisure. So for us, the parallel there is that we're beginning with the focus on bras, similar to their focus initially on yoga, and patenting the gusset in leggings for the first time. And then we're going to that broader market of made to measure apparel and overtaking that entire industry. So yeah, we see a lot of parallels with those kinds of businesses.
And for consumers, like there's so much appeal to made to measure. I own, I mean, some made to measure suits, and it's just like so much nicer. Like when it's been like made to fit you exactly. And again, I can't relate to, I've never worn a bra in my life, but yeah, I can imagine how frustrating it must be probably for some women if you're just never have had bras that like fit properly. And there's probably some people who don't like, it's just they're in between sizes, or that there's just by the luck of the draw, it's just not that it doesn't kind of work well. And I imagine that's like a quite large. There's a very large market of people who want this made to measure that is fits them perfectly.
Yeah, based on our research, over 50% of women don't fit into any of the standard sizes that exist. So, so half of the population, half of that is completely left out of bras that can fit them. And so then you get people, wearing sports bras or bralettes, both of which are not supportive garments, right? They're putting those under their work clothes. Their work clothes aren't sitting properly. They're going into work not feeling confident, or they're putting themselves into a size that isn't made for them and feeling the discomfort of that, right? Like most bras have metal wire that's going to poke into you if it doesn't fit you properly. And you can imagine anybody who's had any kind of chronic pain, right? It really impacts your quality of life. Even if it seems like it's not a big deal at the time, it grows and grows and grows. And it's a huge problem.
The current sizing system only takes into account two measurements, and it also assumes that you're extremely proportionate, so that if your bust increases, so does your underbust, for example. So that's why there's this huge disparity of women being left on kind of the extremities, and then also those being left out of having these unusual ratios. And we've seen it in the retail industry in general too, where there's now a little bit of a movement into offering plus size clothing, for example, but not very many brands have been willing to take the leap because they believe that the average is where the money is at. But there's a huge market being left out, and we really believe that clothing has been dictated to kind of exist on a hanger and the body's been viewed that way, whereas really clothing should be tailored to the body and the body should be the focus rather than the other way around.
Totally. And that's it, by the way, a huge total addressable market. When you think of 50% of people being dissatisfied with the current bra measurements, like that is a amazing stat, a lot higher than I would have potentially have realized. You alluded to this earlier, but when you think of your company and you think of the future, like what is your vision of DOUBL 10 years from now?
Yeah, so we really believe that technology will bring retail into a totally different place than it has in the last many decades, to the point where that personalization is fully embedded. So that shopping experience, you see yourself reflected back, and really that the future is totally sizeless. There's no need with today's technology for sizes to exist. And given the very, very cushy margins typical of the retail industry, it's really not a huge drastic change to be able to do made to measure. So that also goes hand in hand with sustainability, right? Which is a key topic when thinking about the next 10 years and where things will be. And retail and fashion, are some of the worst contributors to climate change. That's typically for two reasons. So one is thinking about online shopping and returns, right? And the amount of energy that's expended to ship something to you and then have it shipped back and forth. And a lot of companies are trying to tackle that. Like I said, there's lots of measurement companies looking to fit you into the right size, but that doesn't always solve things at the end of the day. The other issue is inventory waste. So there are lots of stats, I won't throw out a number right now, about how many clothing items, perfectly new, are thrown out every cycle. Because like Jess said, these big companies order 2 to 4 runs a year. They do their best job with forecasting how many they'll sell through. And whatever they don't sell through and they can't discount goes in a landfill, which also probably ends up in our oceans. So that's a big problem. And we don't carry inventory waste because we do on-demand manufacturing. So I know you were mentioning earlier, you're new to the retail industry. So that's a great kind of like new term, is on-demand manufacturing. It doesn't need to go hand in hand with made to measure, but it basically just means making things as they're needed. And I think that's really where the future is in general beyond DOUBL. And we hope that we can, kickstart the future.
Why do you think that there's been so little change in the apparel industry in the last couple of decades?
Um, I think that there has been little change because, there's so much power in the consumer dollar, and I don't think the consumer has really demanded change until recently. Even when I first started in this industry, it was like 2017, and we never spoke about sustainability. Like I never even thought about it. And then slowly now, when I'm more at a senior level and I'm interviewing younger people coming out of university, that's the number one topic of conversation. They're extremely well educated, and we're seeing the development of many more materials, many like reusable vegan materials that are incredibly sustainable and offer really low carbon footprint. So I think there has been this new wave where we're realizing how much power there is in each individual's ability to demand change. And then on top of that, it's the cycle, right, where then bigger retailers are realizing they must change in order to provide the customer with something that they're wanting to buy. So then they're implementing these requirements for their factories and for transparency within their supply chain. So there's truly so many steps along the supply chain and the circular apparel industry. It's like truly a cycle. And we need to see change on every level before we see an impact from that change. So I think we really have seen a pivot in the past, now probably 5 to 10 years. But I think in the past, there hasn't been much demand for change, and things are working, right? Like from a money standpoint, a commercialization standpoint, a lot of retailers were cashing in, and there was no push or no need to make a change. So therefore, they didn't make one.
Yeah, if you're the head of an apparel company and the cash is all coming in, there's probably a little bit of mindset of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You alluded earlier that apparel makers have pretty like high margins. What's like obviously there's a pretty wide range, but what's like a typical like profit margin for like an apparel company?
Yeah, based on my experience, many companies won't produce items that have a lower margin than 75%. You see 80% in luxury retail. And then if now with this kind of layered component of sustainability, you're seeing more that like 65 to 70%. But yeah, it's quite high. And it's buffering, right? For like Bryn mentioned, it's buffering for that huge chunk of clearance that you're going to have to do at the end of the year and for the percentage that you're not going to sell through. So most companies are assuming, 75% sell through rate. There's, 4 promotions throughout the year that are going to last a week, and those are going to push through 20% of sales. So by the time you kind of like drizzle it all the way down, you're looking at a 45% margin or something, which is great still. But yeah, that's typically why it starts so high. And how Bryn was saying earlier, for us, since we don't have any of that inventory waste and we don't hold inventory, we don't need to worry about assuming for those clearance dollars, then we're able to come in a little bit more leaner and offer that that transparency and discount essentially to our customers from the get-go.
As you think about the future of the apparel industry, and Bryn talked a little bit about this earlier, what are your kind of closing thoughts on what does the apparel industry in general look like a decade from now, and how is that different from today?
Yeah, I think one of like obviously we've talked about how clothing will change. We think it'll become a sizeless world in the future. I think the other thing is around experiential shopping, right? We've seen such an interesting change in how people purchase items over the last 5, 10 years. Obviously, COVID did a huge acceleration for online shopping, but I think also left people feeling a bit like it took away some community from people, and people are looking for that again. So there's been this really interesting push and pull between in-person brick and mortar shopping and online shopping, and that's something that we're really looking forward to playing in over the next years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting all these different brands where they've kind of gone like the mixture of the two. Like I think of I'm wearing an Everlane
Mhm.
sweater right now, and they're an interesting company that reflects a couple of things you talked about. One is that at least they make it seems like sustainability is like a big part of the brand of Everlane, but also in the sense that e-commerce is a big part of Everlane, but they also have brick and mortar stores in major locations that are often like anchors. It seems like in certain areas. And I can think of other Frank and Oak when they were more active in Canada had a pretty large retail kind of network. Would you be? Uh, are you interested in kind of longer term exploring like distribution both through like e-commerce direct to consumer and then also like a brick and mortar presence in terms of your own potential stores, but also then selling out through different retailers?
Yeah, we have a lot of grandiose ideas around this. So obviously, we'd love to first tackle the commerce market, and then we would love to develop brick and mortar experiential stores where people are able to come in, for example, with a group of people and do a lot of customization and have a truly unique experience and would travel around the world to come to one of our locations. We also foresee potentially doing a royalties type of wholesale relationship or white labeling our product in the future. So we're able to provide made to measure to people through, their own brand and really kind of hone in into the advanced manufacturing piece of our company. But it's been really interesting just kind of going back to what Bryn was saying earlier too about the future of the apparel industry and what we've been seeing in current trends is that wholesale is seemingly like a dying market. We've seen Nordstrom leave Canada this past year, which was huge. And we've just really seen this movement of brands kind of taking ownership of their brands once again and increasing the number of brick and mortar stores, which during the pandemic, for example, and after the pandemic seemed like the opposite of the correct move. It seemed like it made sense to only put money into e-commerce because then you're not paying for all that overhead and whatnot. But we're really seeing that people missed coming into stores in person and touching and feeling things and talking to their friends and going for a drink and getting lunch. So we really want to lean into that. And then also it layers on top of that idea of creating an extremely strong brand ethos.
Very exciting. Do you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share with the listeners?
Yeah. For those listening who want to find a bra that actually fits, or if you have somebody in your life where you want to give them a bra that fits, you can check us out on our Kickstarter, which will be launching shortly after this podcast airs. And to Jess's point, really things happen when consumers vote with their wallets. And so if there are things that you want to see in the next 10 years, make sure you're supporting the companies that are supporting those ideas.
Thanks for those closing words. And I'm really excited to follow the growth of your company. It's such an exciting point where you're in this launch phase. I think it sounds like the opportunity is massive. And I learned a lot in this interview today. So thanks so much for sharing your experiences about everything from manufacturing, the distribution, building an apparel brand. I found this conversation really interesting. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.